All right. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Educated Homebuyer weekly update. So, the big news, as we've discussed earlier this week on our live call, is that interest rates have trended lower since last Friday's jobs report, and they seem to be holding steady. So, Josh, what do we look like heading into the weekend?
We had a very, very boring week, Jeb. We've been alternating these very busy weeks. Last week was bonkers, culminating with that jobs report on Friday that gave us the big improvement. Close to 0.25% improvement in rates there. But from that perspective, not a whole lot this week. Rates, according to the MBA, their report down 6 basis points. If I'm looking here, Mortgage News Daily says 6 basis points week over week, about 0.25% better from last month. So for everyone, we're kind of pushing back down towards that 6.5, 6.625 range. So for a lot of folks looking to refinance, if you have a 7.25, a 6.25, or 6.625, 6.5 with 0 points is very attractive. Obviously, you can get those rates down lower into the low sixes with paying some points. If you've been around for very long, you know what Jeb and I think about buying a rate that's likely to be available for free later on. But again, not a whole lot of news came out this week. We had a couple of ISM reports. The Institute of Supply Management basically showed slowing growth, which is what we're seeing throughout the economy. We're not in recession, but growth is slowing. One of those reports did show that we have a little bit of concern for inflation in terms of the prices paid component. More importantly, next week we get the CPI data. So we're in an important spot, Jeb. The thing that if you're a realtor, a real estate professional, if you're someone shopping for a home or a refinance right now, the thing that you need to know is we're at like almost 100%, just shy of 100% certainty that there's going to be a Fed cut next month. So the market has already priced that in. I had someone tell me this week, hey, I want you to call me back on September 17th. I think that the Fed's going to cut. And I said, well, you and the rest of the world all pretty much know that the Fed's going to cut, barring something really big in the data going the other direction in the next 30 days, we're going to get that Fed cut. So the market has already priced in all of the good news we have. And good news, remember, for mortgage rates is generally bad news for the economy. So we need more bad news for rates to continue pushing lower. Right after the news came out last Friday, Jeb, we had priced in the Fed funds futures market 3 full cuts this year. Now it's like 50-50 on that third cut. So we're going to get CPI data next week, and we're going to see, did these tariffs lead to inflation like the Fed's been concerned about? We're going to get next month another jobs report. So almost a full 30 days out, we'll get the next jobs report. We get another CPI report. All of those before the next Fed meeting. And that's what we have to be watching. If inflation ticks up, if we get a stronger jobs report, which is unlikely, even though Trump has corrected the calculations and has someone on board that can run the numbers better, I don't expect that we're going to see much difference. So we'll probably get another weak or at least lackluster jobs report next month, which will give the Fed cover to cut regardless of what happens with CPI. So unless we get really hot CPI here for July and then in August and the report that comes out next month, you're probably gonna get that cut, and that's why the market's at 95%. But for you in the market right now, the thing that you need to know, that is fully priced in. We need more bad news, which would be good news for interest rates, for rates to move lower and to see significant changes.
One other thing we saw this week was a little bit of change in the Fed consensus. So Kashkari, who's been very dovish with regards to hawkish, dovish, has been against rate cuts for the better part of the last couple of years. Came out after the jobs report last Friday and basically kind of signaled that a rate cut. He thinks a rate cut needs to be on the table and that they need to be doing something more aggressively. So that's a change in stance there. On top of that, we have Kugler leaving the Fed, resigning from the Fed. Since then, Fed Chair Powell has actually come out and appointed someone until I think January. It's kind of a temporary position, somebody that kind of believes what he believes with regard to rates. So, that will help the consensus there and the dot plot. I don't know when we get the next dot plot. Is it plot? Is that September, Josh, or is that the following report?
I think it's we get the last meeting of the year.
Okay, so either way, that could signal even lower rates for the future and help the Fed funds futures there. But either way, the discussion is that Chair Powell is on the chopping block. Whether that happens, in an earlier firing, or at least next May. And so between now and then, Josh, it's kind of status quo. We're just continuing to watch the data.
There was a thought that that Trump would nominate someone for this position that Googler had vacated, because they have to be on the board to be able to become the next chair. So they thought that they would put him in, or at least have experience. So some of the people are not currently serving, but have previous experience on the Federal Reserve. So the guy that he nominated didn't seem to be someone that was in the mix for being the next Fed chair. So unlikely to happen there. Barry Habib, we didn't talk about this on the show, friend of the show. He is actually now on the board at Fannie Mae. We just got some news earlier today. I don't think you or I have actually read to know exactly what it means, but apparently the Trump administration is planning an IPO for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to reprivatize them. He has said that they will maintain the implicit government guarantee, which should mean that it doesn't have an impact on interest rates, but the devil is in the details, right? But what Habib was saying in an interview that I read with him is that he doesn't think Powell will stick around till May. The last 1, 2, 3 months would be increasingly uncomfortable, and he doesn't need that. So unless you just really want to be a thorn in Trump's side, at some point early next year, he'll probably bow out. So we're already seeing that regime change. And as you said, as related to what we do here every Friday, the market update and the rate update, those things should be positive for rates. But the Fed doesn't just get to magically set rates and say, this is what they are. They have to read what's happening in the economy. We get a lot of comments whenever we do any commentary like this. Well, I think rates should be this. I think rates should stay high forever. I think rates should be a ton lower. No one really cares. We go back to the Fed's mandate, which is full employment, which is slowing, and maintaining price stability.
Well, that's one thing I think Polymarket now has Waller kind of leading the front with his Fed choice pick. And one of the reasons, or one of the things I read, was that it's because he is kind of forward looking. He's not just looking at the data today. He's looking at what it could do in the future. And I think that probably kind of goes more inside along with what Trump's expectations are with where rates are going. And so, not one person, dictates the Fed funds rate, right? It's a vote from the board, but that person has more sway than anyone else. And Trump's going to get another pick on that, as far as the board member goes. So it's going to lean in that direction.
And not that we want to, this isn't about politics. The only thing that we care about politics here is how it might impact the interest rates. So Trump, after those really bad jobs numbers last week with monster revisions, fires the head of the BLS. And you're like, oh, we're politicizing this data collection. And I have no doubt that she was a great data scientist. So as with all things Trump, there's a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors and fireworks going on. But again, Barry Habib said in that interview, he's like, our Fed relies heavily on this data. The data isn't cooked. It is not rigged, but we haven't made corrections to the birth death ratio that has massively overstated jobs for the last several years, which would have impacted the Fed decisions. So saying no one's cooking the books, no one's rigging those numbers, but we know that as things change over time, we are not adapting to how that data is collected and scored to give better information to the Fed. The Fed themselves, probably the biggest mistake they made through COVID is not being forward looking. Like, we're looking at the data. Well, the data, as we know, was not picking up the housing inflation anywhere near the way that it should have. Anyone with a brain could see housing is up 30, 40, 50%. Rents are through the roof. That's inflationary for consumers. And they're like, oh, inflation remains well rooted. And you're like, buddy, I don't know what you're looking at. And now we've been for the last year and a half, inflation is out of control. You look at Trueflation, you look at any of the underlying reads. Inflation is not back where we want it to be, but it is rapidly progressing in that direction and will as rents come in line. So from that perspective, I think we always should be saying things change, the economy changes, the world changes, Americans change. So we need to be changing the way we collect that data. Not that you can then shift it to the political whims of whoever is in the White House, but that we're getting accurate information so that the Fed can make good decisions to give you guys the most accurate interest rates.
Right. So interest rates, 2025 low for the year. A lot of people on the rate watch list have been reaching out, trying to see if they're in a position to refinance, if it makes sense to refinance. So Josh, If you're not, well, I guess not Josh, but if you're not on that rate watch list, jebsmith.net/rate watch will get you on that list, or theeducatedhomebuyer.com/rate watch will get you on that list as well. But Josh, right now, headed into the weekend, does somebody, if they're under contract, are they locking right now ahead of CPI news, I think Tuesday, or are we kind of carrying it through the weekend with the idea that you're floating based on the lack of potential information out there?
I'd say you could justify
news.
either route. If you're the person who is not super risk averse, you're a little risk tolerant, and you're okay, and you and your lender need to have your finger on the button. If we get a hot CPI number and the 10-year spikes, you probably just want to make sure you get it locked. But if you want to get a look at that, it's not a huge amount of risk, a little bit of risk, but not a huge amount of risk there. And if the flip side, you're like, I am super risk averse, I hate risk, and I'm already up to my eyeballs in home inspections and this, that, and the other. And I would also say, I've had a lot of conversations with people this week that are saying the same things that we were hearing last August and September. I think the Fed's going to cut more. The rates are going to go lower, and they're turning their nose up at $200-300 a month of savings that's on the table at low or no cost. So we don't have sunk costs. If rates go lower, you can do this again in 6 or 12 months. So just be careful. I would be more inclined to ring the cash register on the way down if you're looking at a refinance. On a purchase, I don't know that next week CPI is going to make all that big of a difference. We really need to see a whole nother month's worth of data and see how bad the jobs are.
Josh, I refinanced last September when the rates went low, and they haven't been that low since last September. I literally rang the bell on the day that the rates were low. I was able to do that because I watched them daily. Most people aren't able to watch them daily. Get on the rate watch list so that we can watch them and reach out if something changes. That said, if you're going through the pre-approval process, you have questions, jebsmith.net/start or theeducatedhomebuyer.com/start. We'll get you in touch with Josh and the team. Reach out if we can be of any assistance over the weekend. But until next week, buy right, borrow smart, and build wealth. Adios.
Amigos.